Hey guys, Twin Soulful. Just going to explain a little bit how electricity works, volts, amps, and resistance, or ohms. So just a brief little overview, just to give you guys a little general explanation. The volts is what's actually pushing the amps. So that's the main thing, like with solar panels in particular. These panels, they're rated at 12 volts, but in reality, if you do the open voltage test on it, it's going to be closer to a minimum of 18 to 24 volts, simply because the amps that it's putting out has to have the volts to push the amps into your batteries and throughout all your solar equipment. So say this panel right here, this is the 45 watt Harbor Freight kit. It puts out roughly 2.5 to 3 amps at 24 volts. But you see, the battery, if your battery is 12 volts, which mine are, you can't have exactly a 12 volt panel, because it's not having any push for the amps, because if the panel's 12 volts, your battery's 12 volts, your battery's going to stay right at 12 volts, but it's not able to push the amps in because your battery bank is going to be higher than your solar panel amp output. So that's just a little explanation about it, because I know for me that was confusing for a while. So it's kind of like the same way with hydraulic systems, or even like your water system. If you have, we're just going to say 10 pounds of pressure in a reservoir, if your pump could only put out, we'll say 10 pounds of pressure, into your reservoir, the water, we'll call the water the amps. If your pump could only pump out 10, let me get this straight, it's starting to confuse me. If your pump could only pump out 10 pounds of pressure into it, and your reservoir already has 10 pounds, your pounds not going to increase, it's going to stay the same. Same way with electricity. If your volts is 12 volts and your battery's 12 volts, it's not really going to be able to push the amps into your reservoir, because it's the same, or in this case into your battery bank, because it's the same amount of pressure, or you could say volts. So if you have a tank, say your reservoir is at 10 pounds of pressure, water tank, it needs to be up to 15 pounds of pressure. If your pump's only putting out 10 pounds, it's not going to be able to fill it up to the 15 pounds. Even if your amps are high, if your pump's not putting out enough pressure, it's not going to fill it up to 15 pounds. Same way with electricity. If your battery's 12 volts and even the amp, just say theoretically the amp output on these panels were, I'm going to say 100 amps, theoretically speaking now. If your volts is at 12 volts, it's not going to really be able to charge a battery. Now, yes, you can run stuff off the panel at that point if it was theoretically only putting out 12 volts, but in order to charge your battery, your voltage is going to have to be higher to push the 100 amps into your battery. So, and like I said, 45 watts, it's not 100 amps. You do the math on it, tops is about 3 amps for these panels, for me at least. So that's just a little explanation about how volts and amps work. Now resistance, this is a little different. With my experience with resistance, it really just limits your amps, not necessarily your volts. Now, you do have a slight voltage drop, very, very slight. Most of the time, like if you put a resistor in a circuit, honestly, it's not even going to do much resistance as far as your voltage. Your voltage is practically going to stay the same. It might drop maybe 1/100th of a volt, which is very little. So, I mean, it's really not dropping your voltage at all. It's just reducing your amps. So, say if you had, 5 amps of current, if you put a 5,000 ohm resistor in, it might drop it down to maybe 4.5. Don't quote me on that, because I'm not extremely good with resistance, but that's just the idea. If you have a 5 amp, power source, and we're just going to call that 12 volts. If you put a 5,000 ohm resistor in it, might drop your amps down to roughly 4.5, but your voltage is still going to stay at 12 volts. So resistance does not necessarily change your voltage that much if you're actually using the physical resistor. Now, of course, if you have other components into your circuit, it will drop your volts down. It'll have a voltage drop. But most of the time, resistance is limiting your current, not necessarily your voltage. It's not going to affect your voltage, maybe slightly, just depending on what type of resistance it is. You know, like if you have a corroded wire, you know, it'll probably drop your voltage slightly. But just a little overview of how volts, amps, and watts work. Volts, amps, and resistance, I should say. That's just a little overview on it. Once again, you know, the 5 amp thing, that's just my, you know, top off of my head estimate there. So, you know, don't quote me on that. You know, that's probably not even going to drop it that much. That was just an example. So same thing with the pump and the pressure and all that, just an example. So just for you guys to get the idea of exactly how the electricity works with volts, amps, and resistance, or ohms. Just a little overview, so I hope that helps you out. I know for me, in the beginning of starting, you know, playing around with electricity and resistance and all that, it was confusing for me to get, because I'm just like, how does that work, you know, because it was so overwhelming for me, because I had like no experience whatsoever, you know, and it was pretty hard to get a grasp of for me. I don't know why. It's real basic if you're looking at it, you know, now for me, but starting out, it was so confusing. I couldn't get it. But anyways, I hope that helps somebody out there. Just a basic explanation of how volts, amps, and resistance works. Got any questions, you know, feel free to comment down below. I'll answer them to the best of my ability. So yeah, take care, guys.